Transformers New Leader by casting Moonlight. What if Megatron was a sparkling when he became leader of the Decepticons? Who'd be his friend? His caretaker? His Decepticon enemy?
So explain to me again why we're going to Kaon?
Soundwave resisted the irrational urge to curse the scratchy vocal tones of the Seeker lounging at the helm controls. He turned his head towards Starscream, saw newly replaced vocal cords protesting painfully to the movement. His vocal cords had been brutally sliced when an Autobot destroyed his lower faceplate and vocalizer. Book had administered his tender care and forged him an entirely new vocalizer. An electromagnetically disturbed vocalizer, but vocalizer nonetheless. He did not require the smooth, deep tones he had used to sing with before this war began to do his duty for the Decepticon cause. The damage done to his lower faceplate, nose down, had been irreplaceable. The nanites that were used to repair the flexible and payable metal had not been able to forge and regrow his lower faceplate. Now he wore a mouthguard over what were now exposed wires and connections that kept his vocalizer and audiols working. Thankfully, his mouthguard and visor fitted perfectly, and his face mask prevented his annoyance and pain to be physically seen by the two other occupants of the pods that were flying to Kaon. The story of why was a very clean-cut one. They need a new leader. There just happened to be in the former Lord's heir in Kaon, being protected by personal bodyguards until he, Starscream, and Shockwave arrived to bring the new leader to the Nemesis to further his safety and begin his reign. The battle that had destroyed his voice had been a particularly long and gruesome one. Many Decepticons and Autobots had been killed in the battle. Everything had come to an end when Lord Galvatron had fallen to the new Prime's, Optimus Prime's, hand. All Decepticons had retreated, now in hiding until the new Lord was ready to take Lord Galvatron's place.
We are going to Kaon to give our new Lord of the Decepticons and return to the Nemesis with him.
Shockwave answered calmly from the weapons station, without infliction of what he thought of this plan in his vocals. Soundwave locked his unseen gaze on Shockwave intensely. He did not trust the Cyclops, nor did he trust Starscream, but at least the Seeker had a sense of loyalty to the Decepticon name. Shockwave had shown many instances of treachery both on and off the battlefield. Even if it was not the Autobots he was performing the acts of treachery for. He scanned the service port of Shockwave's processor with his rare Sigma gift of telepathy, but received nothing except statistics on the pod they were piloting. Any deeper of a probe would have alerted the formidable Cyclops to his telepathic actions, but probably wouldn't have mattered. A search of Shockwave's mind, shallow or deep, never delivered anything official. Nothing he could trust was true. The mech seemed to have a way of tricking his own processor, revealing nothing of any intentions he had, good or bad. Soundwave did not move his helm, but he did retract his telepathy and optics from the purple mech instead of opting to look out the helm's window and spot the twisting fixed support beams that held the rounded surface, similar to a mushroom upon it. They were almost there. Apparently, reputation preceded them in the Decepticon stronghold of Kokula. Formalities were expressed to great extents, even giving them a long line of guns to border their walk into the stronghold itself. The moment they stepped into Kokula's structure, plain purple and black painted mech bowed and led them down the dimly lit hallways to meet the new lord. Starscream was hauntingly explaining just why he would be best suited to be Lord of the Decepticons, making the escort twitch a few times, and once or twice giving a soft vent. Shockwave merely walked in his stoic manner, with no outward appearance of what he thought of this errand. Of course, behind Starscream's ego-filled words was a storm of intelligent thoughts, speculating about their new leader. Soundwave too had thought about what their new leader may be like, and though he had already vowed to serve him in all ways possible, he hoped, a rare deed for him, that their new leader would understand the bond between a tape deck holder and his cassettes, because he would not tolerate or abuse or harm to his cassettes. The escort mech opened a heavy set of double doors and bowed deeply.
Please, sirs, make yourselves comfortable. I shall fetch the Lord immediately.
And exited, closing the doors behind him. Soundwave studied the room he was in a matter of astroseconds. It was a rather large room, about the size of a soccer field, with the walls separating them and the yellow smoke swirling atmosphere outside a crystal clear, thick glass. Soundwave strode over to the only piece of furniture in the room, a long rectangular table in the center of the room, pointing vertically with a door that could comfortably seat around 10 mechs, and took a middle seat. Eventually, he was followed by Shockwave, who took a seat down at the far left end of the table, the yellow light of the outside smoke casting his frame into an odd silhouette. Starscream, hissing and murmuring darkly under his breath, continued to stand, stalking up and down the length of the table.
I can't believe we have to wait for him.
Starscream grumbled. Soundwave reviewed his thoughts about what he knew of this new lord, which wasn't much, to be truthful. Lord Galton had been oddly silent about his heir, though he had mentioned that he would be powerful, with an odd pronunciation on the word would, but Soundwave did not question him.
Where is he?
Starscream shrieked, his high vocalizer echoing the large chamber. Soundwave could freely admit that his former lord had not been fully operational in the processor. Soundwave also knew that Galvatron had known it as well when he had been functional. Soundwave had entertained the thought of a new lord being as deranged as Galvatron on the way to Kolkar, but I didn't think it likely.
How long are we supposed to wait?
The heir would have introduced himself in battle sooner or later if he had the same plasma-thirsty urges as Galvatron. The fact this lord had been hidden all these Vaughns brought the aspects of secrecy and deceit into view, the treasures and marked traits of a Decepticon. Perhaps this mech would be a more strategically centered leader than Galvatron had been.
I've infinitely better things to do than stand here and wait for this new leader.
Starscream really needs to shut up.
Soundwave thought, getting his denter behind his mask, and he turned his helm to glower unseen by the Seeker. In doing so, he caught sight of a small being sitting on a chair on the far right of the table, whose chin propped on two folded hands, watching them with vibrant crimson optics and a small frown. Soundwave tilted his head slightly in confusion. How had he missed the presence of a new mind near them? Running a scan diagnostica, Soundwave had found it to be a he, and the he to be a sparkling, almost ready for his youngling upgrade. The sparkling was colored grey, a rather odd choice from the normal color spectrum. It was the color of deactivation. He looked well built, careful consideration put into his frame, with an already considerable amount of armor placed on his frame, though Soundwave guessed it was lightweight armor, as the sparkling did not seem hindered in any way. Or the sparkling had simply gotten used to the weight and learned to compensate and strengthen his struts. Also, if his visor was not malfunctioning, there was a small barrel gun the size of Rumble or Frenzy's pile drivers on the sparkling's right forearm. However, it was obviously set on a low level of power. Probing at the sparkling's mind carefully, he was surprised by the strong barrier already in place. As part of his small code of honor, Soundwave did not deactivate sparklings or tamper with sparkling's processors. Consideration, careful tending, and firm rules could probably mold any sparkling. This sparkling, though his mind barriers were rather formidable for his age, twitched a bit and his fingers clenched, a faraway look appearing, and Soundwave pulled away sharply when he felt the curiously malicious tendrils of comprehension dying towards his telepathic entry. Interesting. Soundwave supposed that if the age of the sparkling was correct, he would have the ability to vocalize speech, if limited speech.
Query. Designation.
The The sparkling looked to him a hint of rather mature interest in his optics as he answered surprisingly clearly.
Megatron! What the pit is that doing here?
Starscream shrieked, just now noticing the sparkling's presence. The sparkling Megatron gave the seeker a wincing glare. Soundwave frowned at Starscream's unusual tact and turned his hidden gaze on the mech sitting to his far right, a little down the table. Shockwave was staring at the sparkling. A small field revealed his surface thoughts, radiating a sense of boredom and faint annoyance. It was as truthful a read as he would get.
My lord! My lord!
The growing cries called all their attention to the door they entered, and Soundwave heard Starscream's null rays making that odd pressurizing sound. A harried-looking mech with Decepticon symbols on his shoulder armor burst through the double doors, throwing his gaze wildly across the room. When he spotted the grey sparkling, who was ignoring the guard's mech completely in favor of staring at Shockwave, he appeared to sag in relief. Soundwave threw a brief scan of his thoughts, placing the blaster he had pulled out when the cries had started into his subspace. Apparently, the mech designated Blind Run had lost track of the heir to the Decepticon throne. He also apparently seemed to have found him.
Lord Megatron, please, don't disappear like that again.
Blind Run cried out, his panic turning into angry frustration. Soundwave turned his helm to look at the sparkling in surprise and shock. Lord Megatron? This sparkling was the heir to the Decepticon throne? He regarded Megatron again, taking in the sparkling's manner and appearance. Yes, he could see this sparkling becoming a Decepticon lord with the right instruction and training. Fortunately, that was something he could provide for Megatron, and when he could not be there, however unlikely that would be, his cassettes could take over. Ravage, Lacebeak, and Buzzsaw were mature enough and had worked closely with him to Galvatron to know what a leader must require to both lead an army and survive what would come his way. He momentarily placed a hand on his chassis, rubbing the glass there. He worried about the twins though, and the mischief they could create involving Megatron. Speaking of trouble and Megatron, Starscream was staring at the sparkling rather blankly, and his thoughts were surprisingly quiet. It didn't necessarily bode well or badly, but it did serve to give him a jolt of frustration on how hard it was and had always been to understand his comrades. In response to a plea from Blind Run, the sparkling leveled a dark look at the guard's mech before saying lowly,
Go away.
When Blind Run swelled up in anger, red optics narrowing and a swirl of hostile anger flashed towards what the guardsman saw as the pit abomination. Soundwave promptly stood from his seat and strode over to the short mech, grasping his arm and pulling him towards the double doors despite the venomous protests that Blind Run threw at him. Throwing the doors open with his free hand, he shoved the mech out and then locked the doors, ignoring the banging knocks immediately delivered afterwards. Soundwave turned and found the small Lord Megatron staring at him with a childish smirk. Soundwave tilted his helm in a small bow of respect and simply murmured,
Explanation, as you ordered.
Designation?
Megatron questioned in a demanding manner.
Designation, Soundwave, current third in command and communications officer.
He answered honestly. The sparkling seemed to ponder something within that obviously advanced process of his, and then finally nodded in approval. Megatron then pointed at the other two mechs in the room, with a pointed look to Soundwave. Soundwave gestured to the one optic mech.
Designation, Shockwave, Chief Science Officer and a Guardian of Cybertron.
Shockwave bowed his head in greeting. Then Soundwave gestured to the Seeker.
Starscream, current second in command and aerial commander.
Starscream did not react, but continued to stare. Though the blank expression seemed more bemused now, Megatron crossed his arms, the approval turning into a dark frown. The sparkling then jumped nimbly out of the seat and walked over to where Soundwave stood, with only the slightest wobble in his steps. Shockwave leaned to the side to see a small sparkling over the edge of the table, using only his actual hand to support his chin as he did so. Megatron stood in front of Soundwave, and for a moment there was silence. Megatron glowered directly into his visor as Soundwave stared back. Then something struck familiar and Soundwave smirked under the face mask. This was a bold sparkling. He knelt down to level his gaze with Megatron's, a satisfied look in the crimson optics.
Megatron?
Megatron asked with a disturbingly dark tone of voice, and a rather malicious grin for sparkling appeared on his face. Soundwave bowed more officially.
Megatron, leader and lord of the Decepticon army.
Crimson nodded happily and Megatron nodded, approving the statement with a low hiss of
Yes.
when small snickers cremated the quiet of the meeting room. All optics zeroed in on the Seeker was beginning to double over in laughter. He was pointing at Megatron while trying to speak through his laughter.
He. Ha. He's a.
Megatron growled and Soundwave stood up, slightly standing in front of the young lord, glaring at the Seeker. He expected some trouble from the Starscream, but this was just insulting. A quick scan of the Seeker's processor had him shaking his head slightly. Starscream had no respect for Megatron, not one iota of anything but hilarity. Starscream suddenly was given a burst of coherency and cried out with laughter, bubbling beneath his words.
That's a lot of old Decepticons.
Soundwave almost took a step forward to silence Starscream in Megatron's place. He had done it often when Galvatron ordered him to subdue the Seeker personally. His actions were halted when a burst of bright red energy shot out from the knee level behind him. The bright ray of energy hit Starscream straight in the cockpit, sending him back into the wall. The impact made a loud clang, and a few bits of crumbling cement tumbled onto the dazed Seeker, slumping into a sprawled position on the ground. Soundwave peered down as the sparkling whose glare was disappearing in favor of a big grin. Soundwave flashed over at Shockwave, who was staring not at Megatron, but the arm gun on which he had just used on the Seeker.
You little glitch.
Starscream cursed, nursing his dented wing.
I'll kill you.
Megatron showed his young age as he stuck his glosser out and ducked behind Soundwave's legs, occasionally smirking or glaring at the cursing Seeker curled on the ground. Something had shifted, Soundwave noticed suddenly. Starscream was not only acknowledging Megatron, but showing respect in his threats. Tilting his head, he considered the immature banter occurring between his new lord in charge and Starscream. Slowly, his worries purged themselves. Any thought of Starscream being a credible threat to Megatron deleted from his processor. Starscream would be a friend, a slightly egotistical and vain friend, but an ally nonetheless. The only unknown variable was Shockwave. Soundwave turned his visor on the Cyclops and found the golden optic burning back into him with an unrecognizable emotion gleaming there. Unrecognizable, but made Soundwave wary and his senses sharpened. On edge. Soundwave placed a hand slightly on Megatron's back, causing the sparkling to look up in confusion, but trustingly letting Soundwave guide him out of Shockwave's view and toward the double doors. He broke the hostile stare on Shockwave and exited the room, a dark frown hidden on his face.
Where are we going?
Soundwave looked down at the future of the Decepticons and answered not the Nemesis, not the Decepticon warship, but instead,
Destination, safety.
He paused, then added with an unseen smile,
Safety. Home.
Thank you for watching. I hope to do more fanfiction readings in the future. This fanfiction was written by Casting Moonlight on fanfiction.net. The drawing of Chibi Megatron was done by Matt Molan. on DeviantArt. And the background music is from the album Terra Navigation Protocol by Embryonic. I'll give links to all of those in the description. An electromagnetically